Hello and welcome to another episode of It Came From the Page. And yes, it's undeniable now, even for you people who are like, don't start the spooky season too early. I like the summer. Sorry guys, summer's done. It's time for Halloween. And when Halloween hits, I basically become the most basic of bitches, and I love myself to get me some pumpkin spice lattes, pumpkin spice cold brews, candy corn, pumpkin pie, pumpkin anything, just inject it into my veins. And it seems like as soon as that first fall leaf drops, the only thing I am thinking about is Halloween. It's everything. It's all of my life at this point. The only thing I am able to think about coherently at all. And one of the things that I like to do every spooky season is to just get some really good old school horror anthology TV shows on the go to just kind of watch them and kind of enjoy them and kind of get into that season with just some good old fashioned television. I don't really watch television a lot, but something about this season, it just brings it out in me. So I thought, hey, let's do my top 5 horror anthology shows that you should be watching to get into the mood of Halloween in the spooky season. Now, certain things we're going to talk about right up front. Twilight Zone is not on here, and neither is The Outer Limits. Not because I think those are bad. Both of those are fantastic. Twilight Zone especially is an amazing show. I just think there's kind of a balance. I think it is horror, but there's also some stuff that leans more heavy sci-fi, and I don't think it has as much of it's not as easy to kind of label as one specific genre with Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone is absolutely amazing, though. So if you're in the mood to watch Twilight Zone, absolutely watch Twilight Zone. It would be my number one if it was being considered. 2, I'm not going to give you episodes recommendations because I think the entire reason for the season and what makes these shows so entertaining is that a lot of times you go in not knowing what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to be on the screen. You don't know what the story's going to be. You don't know nothing. Sometimes that leads into some episodes that are kind of meh, a dud, but most of the time it gives you a unique story told and you have no basis or opinion going into it. Now, if you really want to and you want to spoil the fun for yourself, I guarantee there are some article by some underpaid journalist ranking all of the episodes of various TV shows I'm going to be talking about. So if you want to lose the fun and you only want to watch the best of the best, you can look it up. But I think it's more fun to kind of go into a lot of these not knowing what you are going to get. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Going from 5 to 1. Number 5, Ghost Story, aka Circle of Fear. This was a one-season television show from 1972 to 1973. Halfway through, it changed names to Circle of Fear. I have mostly seen episodes that were labeled under Ghost Story. So I haven't seen any of the Circle of Fear episodes. I don't know about quality, but as far as I understand, it was the exact same show. It was just, changing the name halfway through. These are, this is an hour. So this is an hour-long, old-school anthology. And I just think there's something really unique about this series. It sets tone really, really well. And it puts you into a very 70s style of horror. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that a whole bunch of these episodes are written by Jimmy Sangster. And Jimmy Sangster, if you don't know, he wrote a lot of the old Hammer horror films. And I think that style kind of gets in here. You're not going to Gothic castles or anything like that, but you can definitely see that element of Jimmy Sangster in here. He doesn't write every episode, but he did write quite a few of them, so I think you do kind of get that feeling in here. They are kind of hosted, you get a very, very brief hosting segment that opens it by Sebastian Cabot, but it's not a really heavy hosted show. He kind of shows up and just says a few things and gets you into the spirit. But it's very, very fun. Keep in mind, when I say an hour of television in the 70s, that's different than an hour of television now. It's more like 50 minutes. Because most hour TV shows nowadays are about 44 minutes, and that's just because the amount of advertisers changed over the years. So Ghost Story is just fantastic. I really, really love what I watched from this series, and it is really, really good at setting tone and just gets under your skin a little bit and is actually creepy. So definitely would recommend this. Number 4, this might be the most obscure thing that I'm going to talk about, and this is Night Visions. This was another one-season show, only aired in 2001, and it is pre-Saw. I think that's the most important thing to note about this series, is this is before Saw made horror television unbearable for a few years, because, oh my goodness, post-Iraq War horror films for a long time, I just don't like the early 2000s for most horror. Now, there's plenty of good things, but, for television especially, the ones that are most famous for a horror anthology of the early 2000s, things like Masters of Horror and its sequel series Fear Itself, I think Night Visions is much better than both of those. And it actually features some very famous horror directors behind the scenes. There are episodes directed by Tobe Hooper and a few episodes directed by Joe Dante. Hilariously enough, this series is hosted by musician Henry Rollins, who just kind of shows up in between stories. So basically, this is another hour TV series. It's 2 stories told within that 44 minutes, and in the middle and at the beginning, you get Henry Rollins kind of just doing some very, very minor hosting duties. And I had a great time with this. Some of these were extremely creepy. I thought the tone was really well on these. A lot of these are adapted from various short stories by creators you might recognize. And this is a show that I don't think I ever would have encountered if I didn't start doing research for this episode. It's never been released on DVD. It's never even entered streaming. But thankfully, it's all on YouTube. So this is one of the things that I didn't mention about Ghost Story. But Ghost Story also a lot of it is on YouTube as well. Night Vision is only archived on YouTube, which is just kind of wild, especially when you think of some of the more larger directors in here. This was on a pretty big network. I believe it was on Fox. So it is very weird that this has just kind of disappeared. Like, this is one of those things where I would have never encountered it had I not hopped in for this episode. And I just had a great time. I just didn't know what to expect. A really solid anthology series. I think that, they did a great job of making sure that they didn't overbear you with any of the stories. They really got to that crisp 22-minute stories because they're splitting into 2. So it really, really works out well. So I would really recommend Night Visions. Number 3, Treehouse of Horror. Now look, I understand. You're like, well, the Treehouse of Horror isn't actually a television show. It's part of The Simpsons. Yes, I understand. And you might be like, he put this on here? He's putting Masters of Horror? Yeah, I'm sorry. Make your own list. This is my list. There are 34 episodes, at least by the end of this year. So they're actually doing 2 Treehouse of Horror episodes this year for this season. But that's more content than Night Visions has. That is definitely more content than Ghost Story has. So it's like, it has enough content that it's basically its own show at this point. And honestly, it's like the only thing I come back to year and year again. If you don't know what Treehouse of Horror is, it is the Simpsons Halloween special. Starting in season 2, every year they did Halloween special episodes. Now, they didn't always air at the right time. Sometimes they air in November, blah, blah, blah. But they were always made to be Halloween-specific episodes. And these are some of my favorite Simpsons episodes. It is amazing the amount of content they managed to fit into a 22-minute episode. Because you get 3 stories in most of these. And that is pretty remarkable because they do amazing jokes. They tell some very funny stories. And, some of these are relatively creepy. I think that it really introduced me to a lot of very famous and important horror fiction through the lens of The Simpsons. Like, that first episode from season 2 introduced me to Edgar Allan Poe when they basically just do a complete straight version of The Raven read by James Earl Jones, and they only minorly add little Simpsons gags to it. But for the most part, it's very straight. informative and very creepy and really well made. And it's very funny that, this is a comedy series, but it introduced me to so many classic horror things. I think of, my favorite one is the Shining episode. The Shining parody might be my favorite Simpsons anything. I just love that little segment for Treehouse of Horror. And, I saw that and fell in love with that before I encountered The Shining. So it's something that, is really, really important to kind of lay the groundwork for like what my love of horror would become, because there's all these very specific references in here and they do it all, but they do it all so goddamn funny. It is such a fun time. If you've never seen Treehouse of Horror, these are all on Disney Plus now. You can just pop up Disney Plus and watch them. If you're watching on Disney Plus, go through the effort to make sure you're watching in the proper aspect ratio, because Disney Plus automatically like zooms in and fucks up the aspect ratio. Especially those early seasons of The Simpsons, you have to watch in 4:3 because they literally have specific gags that only work in the proper aspect ratio. So that's your minor thing. You can do that on Disney Plus now, but you have to go into the settings. I remember when my mom was over and watching things on her Disney Plus account, I immediately went in when she was out of the room to switch to the proper aspect ratio. She never noticed, and she now has a better experience watching The Simpsons, I guarantee. But it was driving me insane because I was watching it and I was like, oh my god, this is awful. I must go and change these settings. But regardless, Treehouse of Horror is classic. As we go on for the more, let's just say, less loved seasons of The Simpsons, I still think that usually their Treehouse of Horror episodes are still like some of the highlights and still have some very interesting things in them. I think that they do some good stuff even in bad seasons of The Simpsons with Treehouse of Horror. So I absolutely love Treehouse of Horror. I'm sure you do too. So let's move on to one of the biggest ones. This is my number 2, and this is Tales from the Crypt. This is pretty much the big daddy of horror anthology television, especially if you grew up during a certain era. This was all HBO, and these were a actual half hour. They were not 22 minutes. These were almost always a full half hour. Like, I believe once you take out certain bumpers, it's like 29 minutes, but that's a half hour. Let's chill out. And these are all adaptations of various William Gaines EC comics, either Vault of Horror, Tales from the Crypt, and I think there's like suspense stories or some, I don't remember the exact name for the ones that aren't as famous, but they do pick stories from those as well. The directors on this are just, it's stacked, man. You have like Richard Donner, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger directed an episode, Bob Hoskins directed an episode. Like the amount of wild creative teams that have braced the screen from Tales from the Crypts makes it so that, it has to be on here. It branched off into 2 movies. There was a 3rd movie, but we don't want to talk about that one. There was 2 good movies. There was even an animated series. John Kassir, who plays the Crypt Keeper, is just outstanding. He opens every episode with some classic spooky gags, and I figure half of my comedic personality is probably from watching Tales from the Crypt episodes, because I feel like I kind of lean into the Crypt Keeper a little bit with my hamminess. But I love this show. It's one of those shows that, you can go any season to find at least 1 or 2 great episodes in there. They very wildly in tone and execution, but they always have great effects. It's really outstanding to watch some of these and think like, wow, this was done on TV. Like, that looks really, really good effects wise. And it's just a classic. If you are into or grew up reading old Vault of Horror or any of those, go back in and pay some dues to the Crypt Keeper with Tales from the Crypt, because it's worth it. A lot of these are on YouTube as well. Not a lot, just a few of them. There seems to be kind of like a weird smattering. Like I think most of season 3 is. There have been 7 seasons of this show. There have been many huge box sets to get all the DVDs. I don't believe these are streaming anywhere easily, which I never understand why they don't just pop these up on HBO Max or something like that. In Canada, we don't have that, so it doesn't really matter. But it's very surprising how such a famous show, is kind of hard to track down. This isn't Night Visions. This is Tales from the Crypt. This is a huge show, and it inspired a lot of creatives and gave a lot of people their big breaks to direct when they've never directed anything before. And it's a great show. It's really worth watching. It is very funny to. I don't mean to pick on Creepshow, the Shudder anthology series, but what they like, I don't understand why they keep using, like, they have a terrible animatronic for the opening segments with the eponymous Creep from Creepshow, and he just like moves so stiff and he barely does anything, and it looks so bad. It's so bad, especially when you compare it to the animatronics and the puppeteering work that they did in the 80s. Like over 30 years, over 30-year-old show with the Crypt Keeper. And yeah, you can tell this is what Shudder's Creepshow is trying to be, and it's not. There are some good episodes of Shudder's Creepshow. I'm not trying to completely bash it, but it's no Tales from the Crypt. Let's just say that. And going on to number 1. This is another Tales, but this is Tales from the Dark Side, baby! Because Tales from the Dark Side pretty much leaped off of Creepshow the movie. Creepshow the movie in 1982 led to the TV series Tales from the Dark Side, also helmed by George Romero. And, again, I don't mean to talk and mean about the newer Creepshow. I just think there is a very, very George Romero-esque element missing from that modern anthology. And I think Tales from the Dark Side, because it has him behind it, it's just such a damn good show. It is so perfect for the creepy season. Even the intro is so good for this show and just immediately sets the tone. You have a whole bunch of now very famous writers on in the booktube world. Michael McDowell wrote a slew of these episodes. I think there was like 11 of these episodes written by Michael McDowell, who did a whole bunch of script work back in the 80s. He's mostly remembered now for things like The Amulet and the Blackwater series, all these very famous books that we talk about now. His work on TV shows have kind of been kind of forgotten. So I think he has some great stuff in here. I absolutely love Tales from the Dark Side. I don't really know what else to say. It is a hodgepodge of greatness. There's no host to this. It just immediately gets you into the story, which I think is nice. Again, there are like various tone shifts, and I think what's nice about this is that, like Creepshow, it is moving past Tales from the Crypt, being like, oh wow, we love Tales from the Crypt, we want to do something in that style, but we want to do it all our own and an original creation. And I think that's what makes Tales from the Dark Side just eke out a little bit. And I just think it's very watchable, very, very enjoyable. And you have everything from, Stephen King short story adaptations here, Clive Barker stuff in this series. It's just 4 seasons of just exquisite Halloween spooky goodness. So if you've never seen Tales from the Dark Side, it's the one that's going to be probably pretty hard to track down. I mean, I got the complete series on DVD for like $30, and I thought that was pretty good especially for the amount of content. And there's also Tales from the Dark Side, the movie that came out that is really, really good. So that's definitely worth tracking down. That one's very easy to track down. So that might be the best place to start, actually, with the film version. And if you like that, just hop back into the TV show, because I did really like the TV show quite a bit. I just think it's that little bit George Romero. That little snippet of George Romero coming in there that really puts this up at the top. What are your favorite horror anthology shows? Did I miss anything? Are you mad that I put The Simpsons on here? Please tell me in the comments below. I hope you guys are having a good start to the spooky season, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.